Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr. This is episode 192, and it's a self-contained story. All in one episode. It's called Self-Image. Open up! Troy opened his eyes, then regretted it. He closed them again. There's a pounding on the door. Some part of him realized there must have been some pounding before the shouting. It wasn't going to stop. Who is it? Police! Police? Troy thought. Then he cursed. Please don't just say, open up. This was Krang. Very funny. He rolled out of bed, still not opening his eyes. He put his hands out and stumbled out of his bedroom and down the short hall to the apartment's front door. Deciding he would have to open his eyes after all, he pulled them open to slits, then continued to squint at the unwanted light. He leaned forward and peered through the peephole. It was Krang. Krang, who was only called Kent by his relatives, had taken on the ridiculous nickname when they were kids and going through a cartoon phase. It had stuck long after they'd moved on to video games and less savory activities. Funny, asshole, he said, opening the door and stepping back to let Krang in. But Krang just stood there for a second, looking puzzled. His mouth was even open in a way that Troy associated with the recently tased. You coming in or what? Where's Troy? Where's Troy? Very funny, Krang. 2 jokes in 2 minutes. Give it a rest and get your ass in here. Fuck you. Where's Troy? Troy just stood dead still. I'm right here, numbnut. Come on in. You're not Troy. Where is he? Of course I'm Troy. Get in here. But Krang just backed off, looking confused and suspicious. Fine. Thanks for waking me up, Troy snarled and slammed the door. He went back to the doorway of his bedroom, then realized he was too awake, and it was too late in the day anyway. He glanced backwards into the kitchen, and the microwave clock said 10:19. Shit. He went into the bathroom instead. He looked in the mirror. Nothing was unusual about his face. For a moment, he'd wondered if he had done something strange while high last night that had altered his appearance, though Krang should have seen through any disguise. Idiot, he said to the mirror. He brushed his teeth and got dressed. He picked up his phone, intending to text Krang and tell him he was an idiot. But the phone wouldn't open. Fucking face recognition, Troy spat. He opened the phone with his passcode. He tried to reset his face recognition several times without luck. Piece of shit phone, Troy said. He'd have to just live without face recognition. Maybe he'd go to the phone store. He decided to go drive over to Krang's and see what kind of dumb joke his friend had been pulling on him. He pulled up to Krang's apartment complex and took one of the guest spaces. Often they were busy, but this was midday on a work day. He stepped out and started to walk to Krang's building. But he was given pause when he saw an elderly woman watching him from her little porch. She was looking at him, then looking away, then looking back. She seemed confused. Get an eyeful, Granny, he grumbled. He wondered if she were senile. He knocked on Krang's door, then held his thumb over the peephole. Fuck him. If he was going to pretend he couldn't see him, Troy would make sure he actually couldn't see him. Who's there? He heard Krang say. It's me, dumbass, Troy said. Right. Someone weird was at your place, Krang said through the door. That was me, Troy said. Well, what was up with your face to make it do that? Krang asked. Some kind of magic trick? What are you talking about? Troy said. Open the damn door. Krang opened the door. He looked at Troy, still clearly afraid and confused. It's just me, Troy said. Stop acting dumb. Acting hell, Krang said. I can barely look at your face. What is that supposed to mean? Troy asked. I mean, it keeps changing, warping. Krang squinted and looked away as though Troy's face was the sun. It's freaking me out. Well, at least you admit it's me, Troy said. Yeah, Krang said. Your voice is the same, and the words you use. It's you. I just can't look at you. But I looked in the mirror this morning after you came by, Troy said. I looked normal. Don't know about that, Krang said. Look in my mirror. Tell me what you see. Troy entered and went to Krang's bathroom. He looked in the mirror. His face was normal. Nothing. It's just me. Well, not to me you aren't. Krang was holding up his phone. Let's try this. He didn't wait for Troy's approval, but snapped several pictures. Yep, he said a moment later, flipping through them. Let me see, Troy said. He looked at him, and his stomach flopped. He thought he might be sick. It was him, or at least it was his body and his hair, but the facial features were different. Not his, and also different from each other in every picture, although they'd been taken a second or two apart at most. The pictures were even slightly blurry, as though capturing movement. Yeah, that pretty much tells it, Krang said. Do a movie, Troy suggested. Krang did so, and Troy watched it back, fascinated but appalled. His face was changing, melting, and reforming new looks by the second. Strange, he said. He looked back in the mirror. He still looked like himself there. He touched his face. Something seemed to be happening, but it was difficult to tell what. I can sort of feel it, Troy said, but only with my hand. When I touch it, my face feels normal, and it looks normal in the mirror. Krang shrugged. I don't know what that is. Maybe it's because it's you who's doing it, so you aren't affected the same way. Maybe, Troy said. Only it came out as meh. He held his mouth. That was weird, he tried to say, but it sounded like Krang was looking at him concerned. Maybe you ought to see a doctor, he suggested. Or at least go home, rest. Maybe it's temporary. Troy nodded, and Krang seemed to understand. He led Troy out of his apartment. Will you be able to drive? Troy garbled out something that wasn't really a yes, and Krang just said, Okay then, drive safe, and stop driving if you feel bad. Troy got home and flopped into bed. He tried talking, but it always came out garbled. He felt his face, and it was moving around more than ever, though when he dared to look at a mirror, it still seemed normal. He fell asleep, but woke up some hours later when his head hurt. Not only that, but his arms and back were aching. He looked in the mirror, saw nothing, and set up his phone to take a video. The video showed what he was afraid of. Not only was his face changing, but his entire body was now altering, second by second. He was even becoming taller and shorter, yet somehow this was not reflecting in the mirror. He also assumed that height changes would alter how he could see, but it didn't. He was feeling very badly now, and he went back to bed, but before he went to sleep, he decided to set up his camera and take a video. He plugged it in so it would have power, and he knew that the memory was mostly unused, and the video could go for a long time. He never woke up. Investigators gave a copy of the video to us, and we have determined that Troy was, in fact, an imp with an unfortunate power that drained his body of its energy. He eventually died of heart failure when it no longer had the strength to pump oxygen to his brain. No known connections to other imps, no known cause for his power to manifest at this particular time. No loose ends. Files being marked complete. The video is being included in the file, along with the pictures and video from his friend Kent, Krang's phone, and a copy of his version of events. And that's the story. Obviously, this is part of the Connections continuity. If you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, CryptoBiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. And thanks for listening. Words and music, copyright 2021, CryptoBiography LLC, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.